It started in the least romantic place imaginable, an old repair shop that smelled of oil and burnt coffee. My uncle owned it, but I was the one on the floor most days, sleeves rolled up, grease under my nails. She walked in that Thursday afternoon, not like someone lost, but like she had already measured the room and found it wanting. She had a car key dangling from her fingers, her other hand resting lightly on a worn leather bag. Hair tied back, but not too neatly, like she had done it quickly, without caring if it looked perfect. Her eyes found mine before she even spoke to anyone else. "My car," she said, holding the key out with a kind of casual authority. "It's making a sound it shouldn't." I nodded, taking the key. Cars usually do that when they want attention. She raised an eyebrow, the corner of her mouth twitching, half amusement, half warning. And that was the first thing I noticed about her. She didn't give smiles away cheaply. The hours passed with me under her hood, checking valves, tightening bolts, listening to the engine like it might confess something. She waited in the corner of the shop, not scrolling her phone like most people. Instead, she leaned against the wall, eyes scanning shelves of spare parts, as though even dust and old metal were worth paying attention to. Every so often, I'd glance up. She never looked away fast enough. She wasn't staring, but she wasn't not staring either. At one point, I asked, "You always this patient?" Her reply came after a pause. "Only when there's nowhere else I'd rather be." The words hung heavier than they should have. I told myself I misheard the tone. When I finished, I explained what I'd done, listing things off too quickly. My hands wouldn't stay still. I wiped them on a rag, tapped the wrench against the workbench, fiddled with the pen on the invoice. She watched me with a stillness that made every gesture feel like too much. "You like what you do," she said. Not as a question. I swallowed. "Most days. Some days it feels like I'm just keeping things alive that were meant to quit already." Her gaze lingered. Something in her expression softened, like she knew the feeling better than I did. When she finally stepped closer to take the receipt, our fingers brushed. Barely. A mistake. Or maybe not. But I felt it, like static catching skin. I don't even know if she noticed, because she slipped the paper into her bag without comment, her voice level when she said, "Thank you." But then she hesitated, just long enough to matter. Her eyes met mine, and the air thickened in that small, ordinary shop. She opened her mouth like she might add something, but closed it again, gave me the faintest nod, and walked out. I stood there after she left, hand still buzzing where it had touched hers. It wasn't love. It wasn't even a story yet. But it was something I couldn't name, and I knew I'd carry that unfinished sentence of hers around with me. Because the way she looked back at me, just before the door closed, wasn't something you forget. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. Yet 3 days later, she was back in the shop, not for her car this time. She walked in holding a bag of pastries and 2 coffees like she owned the place. "My neighbor swears you saved her engine last month," she said, placing the bag on the counter. "Thought you might need something that didn't taste like burnt tires." The shop was quiet that morning. No customers, just the hum of a fan pushing stale air around. I froze halfway through tightening a bolt. Pastries and coffee weren't part of our arrangement. We didn't even have an arrangement. "You didn't have to," I started. "I know." She cut me off, quick but not unkind. "I wanted to." Her tone carried a weight I couldn't place, something tucked between gratitude and something else. She sat on a stool near my workbench, the paper cup cradled in both hands. I noticed how carefully she held it, fingers long and steady, nails neat but not painted. No rings, no bracelets, just hands that looked like they'd done more than their share of work in life. "You're quieter than most people your age," she said suddenly, eyes flicking toward me. I shrugged, wiping grease from my palms. Talking never fixed an engine. She laughed, soft and low. Not the kind of laugh you give to be polite, but the kind that slips out when someone surprises you. And just like that, the room felt smaller. But then, just as quickly, the shift came. She pulled back, her body straightening, her gaze hardening. She took a slow sip of coffee, like she regretted letting her guard down. I wanted to ask about it, but instead I said, "You look tired." Her eyebrows lifted, not in offense, but in something like recognition. "Do I?" "Yeah," I said quietly. Like you've been carrying too much. She looked at me then. Really looked, and for a second her eyes softened, edges blurred by something she wasn't ready to name. She placed the cup down carefully, almost too carefully, as if grounding herself. You shouldn't notice things like that, she murmured. Not about me. The words landed heavier than they should have. Not a warning. Not quite a request either. We ate the pastries in silence after that. She asked about my uncle, about how long I'd been working here, normal questions that meant nothing but gave her distance. Her voice was steady, but I caught her fingers tracing the seam of the paper bag, over and over, like she needed the repetition to steady herself. When she finally stood to leave, she placed her hand on the counter, hesitated, and tapped twice before pulling away. Something small, but deliberate. A rhythm meant only for herself, or maybe for me. Hours later, I was still staring at that spot on the counter, the echo of her fingertips louder than any engine I'd worked on all day. The rain came hard that night, hammering the shop roof like impatient knuckles. I'd stayed late, finishing paperwork my uncle always left undone. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when the bell above the door jingled, I almost dropped my pen. It was her, umbrella dripping, hair damp around her face. She gave a half-smile, like even she wasn't sure why she was here. Sorry, she said, brushing raindrops from her sleeve. My wipers quit on me. Again, I nodded toward the car bay. Leave it. I'll look in the morning. But she didn't leave. She lingered by the counter, pulling her wet coat tighter around herself. The rain was so loud we had to raise our voices. You shouldn't be working this late, she said. Neither should you be driving in this weather. Her laugh was short, tired, almost swallowed by the thunder. She sat on the same stool as last time, tapping her fingers on the metal seat. Guess we both ignore what's good for us. We talked more than usual, about music, about the diner across town that never closes. Her voice carried something softer in the dim shop light, as though the storm had made honesty easier. At one point, she leaned in just a little too close when I handed her a towel to dry her hands. The air between us grew heavy. I wanted to say something. Anything. My throat ached with it. But then her phone lit up on the counter. A name flashed, one I didn't know. The vibration buzzed through the metal, harsh against the quiet moment. She stared at it too long before flipping it over, face down. I pretended not to notice, though I felt every second of that silence. You ever feel like people only call when they need something? She asked suddenly, eyes fixed on the darkened screen. Yeah, I said. But sometimes you want them to call anyway. Her gaze flicked up to mine, sharp, searching. I thought she might tell me who it was, might let me in on whatever shadow hovered there. Instead, she pressed her lips together and shook her head. You shouldn't say things like that. The storm rattled the windows, and for a moment, we both watched it, as though safer focusing on the chaos outside than what was unfolding between us. Her hand rested on the counter, close to mine. Too close. My fingers twitched, almost reaching, almost bridging the space that had become unbearable. Almost. But I didn't. And she didn't. Instead, she stood abruptly, slipping back into her coat. Thank you for letting me sit out the storm. Her voice was steady, but her hands fumbled with the buttons. She left before I could answer, the bell jangling sharp in the empty shop. I stayed frozen in place, palms still flat on the counter where her hand had been. My skin burned with what almost happened, and what didn't. Days passed without her stopping by. I told myself I was fine with it, that I needed the space. But every time the bell above the shop door rang, my chest tightened, only to loosen again when it wasn't her. When she finally did appear, it wasn't with a broken car or coffee. She came in near closing, her steps slower than usual, as if she'd argued with herself all the way here. You're still here, she said softly, glancing at the empty base. Where else would I be? She didn't smile. She just walked closer, coat draped over her arm, and for once she looked uncertain. Her eyes traced the floor, the ceiling, anywhere but me. I wiped my hands on a rag, waiting. The silence stretched so long I could hear the clock ticking above the office door. Finally, she spoke. What are we doing? Her voice wasn't sharp. It was quiet, frayed at the edges. I froze, rag balled tight in my fist. I don't know. She stepped closer, stopping just short of where our shoes almost touched. I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the weariness she usually disguised with composure. "This isn't normal," she said, eyes flicking up to mine. "You know that, don't you?" I nodded, throat dry. "I know." She exhaled, almost a laugh, but not quite. "You're too young. And I'm too." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Her words pressed into the silence until it felt unbearable. I wanted to reach for her, to say something that would make it less heavy, but my body wouldn't move. "I keep telling myself to stop coming here," she went on, voice low, almost to herself. "But then I do. And every time, it gets harder to leave." Her confession hit harder than anything I'd imagined. The rag slipped from my hand, falling to the concrete with a dull thud. I forced myself to answer, though my voice cracked. "Then don't leave." Her eyes snapped to mine, sharp, startled, as if I'd touched something forbidden. The silence that followed was so thick it swallowed the hum of the lights, the distant traffic, everything. She didn't step back. I didn't step forward. We just stood there, locked in a standoff neither of us knew how to escape. Finally, she whispered, barely audible, "You don't understand what it would cost me." The words were raw, stripped of armor. A truth she hadn't meant to say out loud. And then she turned, reaching for her coat with trembling fingers. Before she walked out, she looked back once, eyes bright with something closer to fear than desire. Her voice cracked when she added, "Please, don't make this harder." That night, long after she was gone, I realized it wasn't her absence that hurt the most. It was the silence she left behind, one that had said more than touch ever could. I didn't expect to hear from her again, not so soon, anyway. But late one evening, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. No greeting, no explanation, just her voice, soft and uneven. "Can you check my car tomorrow? It's not urgent. I'd rather it be you." That last part, "I'd rather it be you," played on loop in my head until morning. When she came by the next day, she carried herself differently. Not the steady, guarded presence I'd grown used to. Her shoulders were drawn in, her bag clutched too tightly. I asked what was wrong with the car, but she waved me off. "It's fine. I just needed to get out of the house." Something in her tone made me set my tools down. She sat on the stool again, but this time she didn't fill the silence with small talk. Instead, she pulled a thin envelope from her bag, fingers tracing the edges like it was dangerous. "This showed up in my mailbox yesterday," she said. "From my ex-husband. First I've heard from him in years." She slid the envelope across the counter. I didn't open it, just stared at the way her hands trembled before pulling back. "He remarried," she went on, her voice too even, like she was holding it together by force. "Has a daughter now. He said he thought I should know." As if I asked for that. I searched her face, unsure what to say. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "It's ridiculous, isn't it? That after all this time, a single piece of paper can still knock me off balance." I wanted to tell her it wasn't ridiculous. That people aren't machines. That time doesn't erase the weight of someone who once mattered. But the word stuck. Instead, I asked quietly, "Does it hurt? Or does it just remind you?" Her eyes flicked to mine, startled. For a second, I thought I'd crossed a line. But then she exhaled, shoulders loosening just slightly. "Both," she whispered. The silence that followed wasn't like the others. This one was fragile, the kind you didn't want to break because you knew something was shifting underneath it. She reached for her coffee cup, but her hand shook enough that she set it back down. "You remind me of him sometimes," she admitted suddenly. The words landed like a blow I hadn't braced for. I swallowed, my chest tight. "Is that a good thing?" Her answer came slow, careful, each word weighed. "No. And yes. You remind me of the man I wanted him to be, the one he never was." We sat there, neither moving, the truth between us louder than the ticking clock. When she finally stood, she touched the envelope lightly, leaving it on the counter instead of taking it with her. At the door, she looked back once, eyes shining but unreadable. And in the quietest voice I'd heard from her yet, she said, "Don't become another ghost I carry." Then she was gone. I didn't go looking for her that night. But there she was anyway, sitting in the far corner of the all-night diner across from the shop, a half-finished cup of tea in front of her. She looked smaller than usual, folded into herself, as though the weight of the letter she'd left with me had finally caught up. She didn't notice me at first. I slid into the booth across from her, and only then did she lift her head. No surprise in her eyes, almost as if she'd been waiting. "I left the letter with you," she said softly. No greeting, no preamble. I nodded. "Yeah, I know. You didn't read it, did you?" "No," I said. "Didn't feel like mine to read." For the first time, her shoulders dropped. Relief, maybe, or exhaustion. The diner was nearly empty, just the hum of a broken neon sign flickering above the window and the hiss of the coffee machine in the back. We sat in silence, letting the world shrink to chipped formica and lukewarm tea. Finally, she spoke, voice low. "I don't know why I keep ending up here. With you." My throat tightened. I wanted to answer, but the truth was too big for words. Instead, I let the silence hold it. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was trying to memorize my face, or maybe compare it to someone else's. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something harder to define. "This isn't supposed to happen," she whispered. "Not with you. Not like this." I swallowed, my hands tightening around the edge of the table. And yet, here we are. The silence that followed wasn't awkward this time. It was charged, heavy with the thing we'd both been circling for weeks. I watched her fingers trace the rim of her cup, slow and deliberate. I didn't move, didn't dare. Then, almost imperceptibly, her hand drifted across the table, stopping just shy of mine. The smallest invitation. I met her halfway. Our fingers didn't intertwine, just rested against each other, skin against skin, like the slightest pressure might break the spell. Her eyes fluttered closed. She exhaled, shaky but steadying. "This will change everything," she murmured. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it just makes everything honest." We stayed like that, two hands touching, two lives colliding in quiet defiance of reason. No declarations, no promises, just presence. When the waitress came by with the check, neither of us moved to let go. And as the neon lights sputtered above us, painting the booth in pale pink and blue, she leaned forward just enough that her forehead rested against mine. Not a kiss, not a claim, just the simplest, most undeniable truth. We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to, because the silence finally said everything. I think back on it now, and it feels less like a story and more like a series of small silences that somehow added up to something bigger than either of us. When my friend warned me, "You're falling too deep," I laughed. I thought he was exaggerating. But the truth is, I didn't fall all at once. I slipped, slowly, into the quiet gravity of her presence. Every glance, every unfinished sentence, every time her hand almost touched mine and didn't. She was never a storm. She was the still water after it, deep enough to drown you if you weren't careful. What changed? A lot. And nothing. I'm not the same man I was when I first saw her standing in the shop doorway, car key dangling like an excuse. Back then, I thought love was something loud, obvious, easy to name. Now I know it can be quiet, almost invisible, until one day you realize it's been shaping you all along. And her? She taught me something I don't think she meant to. That strength doesn't mean never breaking. And that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit they're tired of carrying everything alone. We never called it love, not out loud. Maybe that's what made it real. No labels, no declarations, just two people who decided that being near each other was worth the risk, worth the questions, worth the silence. I won't lie and say it was easy. There were days she pulled back, days I wondered if I was nothing more than a distraction from her past. But then there were moments. The touch of her hand on mine, the way her forehead leaned into me in that diner, the way she said, "Don't become another ghost I carry." That told me this wasn't temporary. This was her letting herself be seen, and me learning how to stay still enough to see her. So yes, maybe I did fall too deep. But if I had the choice again, I'd do it the same way. Because she wasn't just my ocean. She taught me how to swim in silence, how to listen to the spaces between words, how to hold on to something fragile without crushing it. And that's not something you regret. That's something you live with and carry forward. Maybe you've had someone like that, Someone who didn't arrive with fireworks, but with a quiet presence that shifted the entire gravity of your life. If you have, you know what I mean. And if you haven't, maybe one day you will. Thanks for listening to my story. If it stayed with you, even for a moment, I'd love to hear what your ocean looked like.